So, just over a week on from finishing Light of the Jedi, I picked up The Rising Storm, which is the follow-up novel, the second novel in Phase 1. Finished it yesterday. Wants to give it a day just to sit and, kind of gather my thoughts on it, because it's a different book. It's got a very different tone and a different pace to it. I will say this is going to have spoilers in this review, so by all means, if you've not read this book or Light of the Jedi, I'll give you a quick non-spoiler rundown as to whether I recommend it. Yes, I do. It's a very good book. I enjoyed Light of the Jedi more, but this is definitely a worthy follow-up, and it grips you all the way through. So if you're thinking about it, pick it up. It is definitely a good read. Now, delving into spoilers, which, again, there are plenty of them in this book, so just beware, again, if you haven't read it. The way that I perceived this book was very much inverse to The Light of the Jedi. The Light of the Jedi started you off with a bang, quite literally, the first chapter, everything goes to hell. And it takes about a third of the book until things really slow down and you get out of the disaster and you get a chance to breathe and kind of catch up and get to know these characters that have been established. This book, it's kind of the opposite. It's set a year after The Light of the Jedi, and the first quarter of the book is called kind of catching up, a quarter to a third of the book. It's called catching up with the characters, introducing some of the new side characters, and setting the scene for the Republic Fair. And when we get to the Republic Fair, that's when, that second act, that's when everything kicks off, and it does not stop. For a good kind of half of the book, it just runs you through every character's perspective. It's battle upon battle upon battle, with the occasional cutaway, and you don't really get a chance to sit down and just stop and catch up with a character, other than, as I say, the odd chapter. Which, this book has so many more chapters because some of them are just like 2 pages long. I think in the end it was like 75 chapters. If I have a quick look at... Yeah, I'm up to like 71, 73, 74, 75, 76. Yeah, it's like 76 chapters. So it tells you how quickly the book proceeds through the story. And I think that's in part because of how many characters there are in this. By all means, there's not necessarily any more or less characters in this than in the first novel, but it's more about the characters that you get to see firsthand and experience their point of view. We get a couple of new characters introduced into this. I think the biggest one is Ty Yorick, who is the Monster Hunter former Jedi, with the really cool looking blade. I've got to say, I really love the look of her blade. And, I think she's going to play a big part in the story to come, given the events with the Great Leveler. The side characters who are kind of bumped up to main characters in this, like Chancellor So, who, again, is in the first book, but she's only kind of referenced every so often, because she's not there. She's not actually in the events of the book. She's there as, like, a side character in the background and occasionally brought forward just to have a scene. In this, she plays a vital part. She's, like, right in the mix of things. And then you've got the characters who, were established in the first book, who, you would say are the main characters here. You've got Bell, Stellan, Elzar, who take up the main Jedi roles, and you've got then the Nihil who are returning, and it really does focus, on the Eye's journey from being that kind of meek, vulnerable character in the first book. In the first book I was kind of rooting for him, Manchurian Ro, because I didn't really know what his plans were. He was the odd one out. He was the loner. You could tell that this Nihil was like a vicious kind of group of people. He seemed to be a bit more reasoned, a bit more intelligent, definitely manipulative. So that kind of made me root for him a little bit, just to kind of be successful on the villain side. Not that I wanted him to, win and defeat the Jedi, but I wanted him to be like the main villain because he seemed really interesting. And as I say, intelligent. In this book, he steps up. Like, this book pushes his journey far beyond what I imagined, he'd get. He goes from being like a vital part of the Nihil at the end of the first book to being the undoubted ruler of the Nihil in this. And he shows himself to be just as, if not more vicious than anyone in the Nihil themselves. He does some screwed up shit in this. And that's saying a lot, considering the fact that there's already a lot of screwed up shit that the Nihil do in this book. That Republic Fair, oh boy, it was something. It's this picture of like perfect harmony. All of Chancellor So's plans coming to fruition. And again, you kind of get this gentle easing in to that part of the story. You've just had time to catch up with Elzar, Stellan, Bell. You read through all of their trials and tribulations and where they are a year on. They're all still kind of slightly damaged from their various experiences. And then, all of a sudden, the fair starts and bang, out of nowhere. And I don't say out of nowhere because we kind of know that they're going to attack, but, from their perspective, out of nowhere, chaos. And it is brutal. Like I say, it must be about 200 pages worth of the fair and the chaos and the killing and the fighting. And, I did find myself struggling at times, and I think this is why I probably didn't enjoy it as much as The Light of the Jedi. I just found myself struggling with the constant fast pace. I think I definitely liked the structure of the first book more, where it's kind of like immediately grabs you, then gives you time to chill, builds up then to the big kind of end of the book, and you pick up that pace again. With this being the inverse, and it's not even really the inverse in that way. The first two acts, I would say, are inverse. You've got the slow first act, and then the big fast-paced battle in the second act. And then in the third act, it's kind of like the first half of the third act, it again slows down a bit, and then they go and attack the Nihil, and then everything again goes to hell. So, structurally, pacing is a little bit different. I struggled a little bit. It wasn't a massive issue. It was just, I put it down. And it took me longer to read than Light of the Jedi because of that, I think. Because, again, you kind of like, okay, I just need to take a break from the death and destruction. Because that's really what it is. That fair, no one is safe. There are so many kind of descriptive moments of people dying and everyone being put in mortal danger. That, it's kind of like, all right, I get the picture here now. I'm going to take a bit of a break, come back to reality. And it is kind of heartbreaking as well, because, again, I loved the optimism and the hopefulness in the first book. I loved seeing the Jedi at the height of their, success, and the Republic at the height of its success. And yes, you've got to have some kind of, event happen to give credence to the story. There has to be, some kind of weight to the story, and you can only give that through, trials and tribulations. And these are particularly harsh trials that the characters go through in this book. But those who survive by the end, it kind of keeps that tension up, and it really does leave an impression on you at the very end. Because the very last line of the book is about how Stellan Gios was scared. And all the way through the book, Stellan is built up as this character who, quite the inverse to Elzar Mann, who, is a bit more of a wild card, wears his heart on his sleeve a bit more, maybe. Elzar is much more composed. He's a member of the Jedi Council. He understands his role as a Jedi is never to let his emotions interfere with his judgments and to not let his emotions overcome him. The fact that, by the end of the book, you see that he is scared, that leaves a mark, And I've got, I think it's called Fallen Star, the third novel, that just arrived today. So I'm going to delve into that in a couple of days, because I want to take a bit of a break from the heaviness of this book. I've got to say that whilst it was heavy, I found some really light moments as well. I'll go back to one heavy moment. And you're probably going to guess what it is, because it was the moment where my hopes were crushed. You'll remember in my first review of the first book, I said that one of my favourite characters was Loden Greatstorm. And with good reason. He's very humorous, doesn't take himself too seriously. Obviously a very good Jedi Master. Padawan Bell was very appreciative of his teachings. And, I said at the end of that, I feared for his future, given his incarceration. And, through this book, I was kind of like, I was prepared that he could die. Because, if anything, these books have set up that no one's really safe. And they gave me hope. We see him in a very short chapter halfway through the book. And I'm like, okay, he's alive. I know that much. Typically, if someone's alive, they're not just going to kill them without cause. So he's probably going to make it through this book. I thought there's going to be a rescue scene, or he's going to break free. And, obviously them taking the opportunity to describe everything that had happened to him, I think was more lending weight to Manchurian Ro's character than anything else, to show how vicious he was. He actually was. And by the end of the book, you're thinking, yes, Bell's there. They're going to save him. Yes, they've broken him free from his restraints. He's out of the ship. They're gonna escape, and then quite literally, my hope is crushed into dust. With the Great Leveler, which I've got to say is a strange new phenomenon. But I appreciate it being different. From my understanding, it's like a basilisk for Jedi. And it makes me understand why Ty might become an important character, given that she is a bit of a monster hunter. So, certainly I see how they're trying to maybe tie those connections in. But some of the light moments I found in this book, I'll go to the first one that really kind of caught my heart. Kit Rep and John. The Chancellor's son and the Mayor's son. I have a soft spot for kind of young romance. It very much harkens back to, my younger years when I was very much a romantic and never got the opportunity as a youngster to fully experience that, being kind of a gay teenager in an era when it wasn't fitting to be a gay teenager or an out gay teenager, so it was much more difficult. I never got to experience like teenage love or anything like that, so I've always, since then, I've always found a soft spot whenever I'm reading about young love stories. And those two kind of gripped me like immediately. I was like, okay, I can see their connection. I can feel the chemistry. I want these two to survive and live happily ever after. And if anything happens to them, I said this on Twitter, I said, I will unleash upon the world a wave of chaos that makes the Republic Fair look like a picnic. And thankfully they do survive. Though much to my despair, I do believe that this is, so far, the last time that Kit Rep and John are mentioned together. I know that Kit Rep, I think, makes an appearance in a book either before or after this. But as far as I'm aware right now, their story is not expanded upon. Which is fine. Again, I'm not expecting there to be novels based around a young gay couple. As much as it wouldn't about any other kind of couple. These are about the stories of the Jedi, the Nihil, the Republic at large. But it's nice when you get that focus on the younger characters. I hate saying side characters, but they're not main characters. If you can get that connection, that's what reading is about. It's about making those connections with the characters. And that, I'll be honest, their story, as brief as it was in here, it kind of reignited some long lost feelings that I've not had since I was in my mid-20s. Both good and bad, kind of like feelings of lost potential, and want. Like the idea that, I'm now in my mid-30s, I'm single. My chances to have that young romance are pretty much gone. But at the same time, enjoying it and living vicariously through them, That's kind of what books are about, I think, is that reflection and that ability to kind of delve yourself into that world. And so that's what I enjoyed about those two, and that moment as well. Again, I just really like the characters themselves. Elzar Mann, they are so different to the Jedi that we get in the prequels. They are like people. I don't want to shit on the prequels. They have their purpose. They have their good points. I get that George had a vision for the Jedi at the peak of their arrogance. Like, they are very stone-faced and serious, and they must abide by the code of the Jedi Order. Here, things are a bit more loose. The Jedi feel like people. They have emotions, and the best thing is that they don't deny that they have emotions. They embrace them. They just simply state that, hey, you know what? We don't allow them to control us. We very much admit we're as real as anyone else, as, non-Force users. We still get those emotions. We still fall in love. We still feel despair. We feel anger. We feel fear. But we don't let them control us. We control them. And that's what makes a Jedi truly a Jedi. At the same time, I love the fact that they can recognize their own arrogance. Both, I think, Stellan and the Chancellor, in the aftermath of the fair, they both admit that they were arrogant in ignoring the warnings and thinking that this fair would be fine, there'd be no danger, that the Nihil were not a threat. So the self-reflection is great to see. And we know that, obviously the arrogance and pride of the Jedi is what ultimately causes their downfall. But you can see here why the Jedi Order is at its peak, because people can recognize that. Yes, they still fall. Yes, they still trip up. They still make mistakes. But they're very self-reflective, which is what I like in those moments. Again, another thing I kind of like is that, as much as I've just chastised the book for killing off my favourite character, I do like that no one is safe, and how some characters are just killed off with a whim, like Mikkel, the Ithorian Jedi, who is in the first book. His partner in the first book is killed during the Hetzel disaster, which again was a very sudden thing. I felt very bad for him, and I thought, well, if he's mentioned in other books, then he might, get eventually his own sort of lead in the series. And I know that he is in one of the young adult novels with, I think it's Bell and Burry. And so, it's the idea, though, that he, being maybe a potential main character in that young adult novel, in this book, is killed off like that. It's just kind of like he's in space, in his vector, and then boom, he crashes into a cafe and explodes into a million pieces. And that's it. He's gone. Done. It's just that. It's the... I don't want to say that it's not serious about character death. It's just that it's realistic. It doesn't give you the time to mourn. It's like, yes, this is a dangerous situation. That person's now dead. We have to move on and accept that. And so, again, it gives a bit of weight to the story, because you're now sat there thinking, who's next? Who's going to go next? And, again, there is a real sense of foreboding by the end of the book that this great leveler, the kind of reinvigorated Nihil, because, ultimately that's what's going to happen. The Nihil are going to regroup with this weapon they've got against the Jedi now. I get the feeling that it's only going to get worse before it gets better. And, obviously the Republic's been shaken for the second time in a short space, but this is like a bigger impact, because a lot of people have just died again. But this time it was, I think the Chancellor was shown to have been maybe a bit naive. Though some good came of it, the Togruta, which again I liked in this book about, as much as it was difficult to keep track of all the different alien races, again, that's something that I struggled with. The introduction of so many characters. Not necessarily the names. Names I'm not too bad with. It's more like the descriptions, because, like, the moment that you say, yes, this character who's this race, and I'm just in my head trying to picture, like, okay, which one was that again? And I might have to stop and look up on my phone, because, I need to have an image in my mind of what this person looks like. And so sometimes that can be a bit distracting, just the sheer amount of different races. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that they're trying to expand the galaxy. They're trying to world build, because it's not just humans that, are in the Republic or the Jedi Order. But sometimes when it's too many too quickly, it can stutter the progress of the story from the reader's perspective. Because again, I'm sat there thinking, rather than concentrating on the story, I'm trying to think like, okay, what race is that again? Okay, Biss. Oh yeah, I remember the Biss. They were weird mouth things, and so it did sometimes stutter my progress. I think this was more prominent than in the first book. The first book, yes, you had a lot of characters introduced, but I think it focused more on who they were rather than what they were. I was disappointed, and I've since been disappointed to learn that Avar Kriss is not really involved in the novels. She was obviously a fairly big part of the first one. I really enjoyed how she synergized with the Jedi. Her, kind of connection to the Force and seeing it as a song more than anything else was really interesting. And I was looking forward to seeing how she, connected with the other Jedi and specifically her and I think it was Elzar. Had a potential blooming relationship. And obviously we know that Elzar has sex in this. And, he does some dark side stuff, which is why I think he's my new favourite. Because, he is a bit of a wild card. He's not your kind of meat and potatoes kind of Jedi. He wants to do good. And again, that's something I like. He recognises instantly, shit, I just went to the dark side. Even for a briefest moment. He doesn't try and hide it away. He doesn't try and pretend it didn't happen. He doesn't fall further. He admits, I used it. I need to make amends. And he does. He tells Stellan. And that to me is unique, is rare for a character to own up to their failings. I like that. I like that a lot. So, again, by the end of the book, you are feeling the weight of all of the action of all these characters. Again, it does a lot to build on them. Bel Zettifar, who in the first book very much felt like a Padawan, it feels like now he is ready to be Jedi Knight. He can stand on his own 2 feet. He's experienced enough now. As I say, I think Ty is going to have a big part to play in the upcoming story, given that she is a monster hunter. Stellan, I feel like his usefulness is going to run out very soon. I don't know why. I feel like as the books progress in this phase, we're going to start thinning out the herd. Elzar is going to be one of those where they might continue to tease his potential dark side fall, only to have him, ultimately come back and not. But again, it might involve him sacrificing himself in the process, because he's been getting all these visions, and it's interesting why it's him. Why is he getting the visions of the disasters? Why did he get the vision of the leveler? There's more to his story. And then obviously Mancharian Ro, he's still got a lot to prove. There's a lot of his history that needs to be looked into. And obviously what this kind of leveler is and how it's going to be dealt with. Because obviously we know that the Nihil aren't around, they don't succeed, the Republic survives, the Jedi Order survives. But it's about the journey here. It's about how bad does it get before they win. And who suffers because of it. So, again, I thought this was a thoroughly entertaining read. I really enjoyed it. It's just, again, for me, the reason that I placed the first book above this one is just because I felt it was paced a little bit better. I felt that the character introductions were handled a little bit better. But this still has a lot of merit to it. It still has some great characters, some great story moments, some great world building. Again, a lot of gravitas behind it. It definitely makes me want to go and pick up the Fallen Star novel that I have. It's just arrived a few hours ago, so I'm going to be moving on to that very shortly. But I enjoyed it. I really did. It's a great kind of follow-on to the first book. And I know there's a lot of supporting novels. I know there's the young adult novels, the comics. I think for phase one, I'm going to stick to the main books. Because I feel like now I'm too deep into, these stories that the supporting novels or the comics, to build up some of the side characters aren't really necessary. And especially as I'm reading through these quite quickly, the cost does mount, because these obviously not super expensive, but not cheap either. So, and it's January, it's just been Christmas, so I'm kind of trying to save a little bit of money where I can, and I just can't afford to go out and buy a bunch of books and comics. So, I will be reading Fallen Star next, I think that's what it's called. to finish off. I think that's the last of the Phase 1 novels. And then, again, if I enjoy that, I will look into Phase 2, and then I might start looking at more of the expansive materials, whether it's comics, young adult novels, whatever it might be. Because I know there's a fair few. I know there's the illustrated books for the kids. As I say, there's the comics, there's the young adult novels that kind of delve into some of the, well, not even necessarily side character stories, some characters who might just loosely be tied in to the events of these books. So for now, I'll stick to these main novels to review. But yes, I would definitely recommend it. I enjoyed it a lot. So that's all I got to really say about it, I think. I don't think I've missed anything out in my mind. Again, it's always hard kind of reflecting back, especially if you've read it really quickly, because it takes a while to settle into my head. But let me know if you've read the books. What did you think when you initially read this? Where does it kind of stand in your rankings of the High Republic novels? And yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you for the next one.